as I start recording this video with the 15th of April, and I intend to talk not randomly because I know what I want to talk about, but without a structure, without order, for less than 45 minutes. And I don't know when it will be published, yeah, this is, I've decided now that I have recorded and programmed for publishing my videos on home economics. Now I will let go a little bit of the bureaucratic aspect. I will not do all the formal talk, the presentation of the documents, etc., etc. Except that was not planned, but that was in the background about the economy. Deregulate the market and regulate your behavior, which is actually 19th century Protestant work ethic. Yeah, because what has been happening since the end of the Second World War is the opposite in the Western world, namely more and more regulations and more loosening in terms of morality. So behavior is completely loosened, completely chaotic, if not downright degenerate for not a lot of people, but a significant proportion of the population of Western countries. And the counterpart is an increase of regulations, taxes, tariffs, restrictions, licenses, rules of all sorts, bureaucratic rules, etc., etc. Yeah. Help more bees, plant more trees, clean the seas. Here, I do not practice this yet. I have not planted many trees. I do not clean the sea, but I do not pollute, or I reduce the pollution, and I help the bees indirectly by having an ecological lifestyle as much as it can be in the current circumstances. Yeah. So I wanted to make a video to talk about the topic of race. I'm in a stable mood, and my thoughts actually are kind of clear. So UPS, I will not explain again. I've done this over and over, but my views about race. Not my views about race, but comments about the topic of ethnicity or race. Even if we leave aside really the very complex, my very complex system, my philosophical, religious perspective, even if I were just really a normal human being, just because I read many years ago, and I still do sometimes, a little bit of philosophy, it is enough in this day and age to have a completely alien, which means different, a completely alien view of the world. Namely, the view of Spinoza. I simplify, but before asking what you prefer, or what you choose, or what you are in favor of or against, or who is in favor of what, before asking this question, do you approve or do you disapprove? Before asking this question, if you have a Spinozian view, you ask yourself, but why do people hold the beliefs or the views that they have? So before trying to judge in the sense of moral judgment, first try to understand. When I'm calm, of course, it's not possible to always do this because it requires a little bit of mediation and detachment and intellectual stability and etc. But most of the time I try to do this. I try to have a neutral view in terms of moral judgment. And I know that the reason why I act like this is partly because of my autism, but also because of my social isolation, and they are kind of a little bit connected. I have not, because of my personal life experience, I haven't the same social code. I mean, I understand, but to be a philosopher, to be a serious philosopher, it's enough to detach you completely from the rest of society, because precisely if you are vaguely serious, you ask yourself these questions before trying to judge people. When you are in a calm and stable mood, you try to understand, but why do they act the way they do? Why do they behave the way they do? Why do they believe or believe what do they have the beliefs that they have? Which is kind of the truth, but the problem is that it's an attempt, that's the Spinozian view, an attempt to intellectually freeze, not freeze, but to cool, in the sense of reduce the temperature by intellectualizing, to cool the world by intellectualizing the world. Because here Spinoza formulated this differently, but the idea is that if you understand, which is actually true, but it's difficult to apply constantly, but if you understand that others, especially those who you find a little bit annoying, if you understand that others act the way they do because they are determined to act in this way, you have less emotional attachment, so you suffer less. And the example that I take, because I've understood, thanks to my how should I explain this? The time that I've been spending and that I still with the Muggles. I'm a wizard living among the Muggles, and they are very interesting, these Muggles. I'm fascinated. But yeah, so because of the time that I've been spending with ordinary humans over the past few months, or simply when I even when I just watch videos of a lower intellectual requirement than the very complex metaphysical abstractions of the Austrian economists, or philosophy, etc., or very complex views on politics, etc. What was I saying? Yeah, So I have lowered my level of consciousness, but for the good, which enabled me to communicate more simply. The example that I have been using for years and years and years, maybe more than 6 years, because I already understood this, thanks to the reading of Spinoza, that the example in Western tradition of irrationality in the sense is Xerxes, the Persian king who invaded Greece. The guy in the movie 300, well, the king of Persia who invaded continental Greece and who was defeated at the Thermopylae and then by Themistocle in 479. Thermopylae was 480, and Salamine was 1 year later. It was a navy battle. Yeah, and the Persians were defeated. Yeah, so the legend says that he tried to cross a river or the sea by building a bridge. Probably it was not really a river, but it was I don't know how you call this in English. A tiny like a river, but actually it's the sea. Here my vocabulary is too limited, but he tried to cross, let us say, a river with his army, so he had a bridge built, but the weather, there was a storm, or there were the tidal waves, or the ocean was agitated, and the meteorological conditions destroyed the bridge, and Xerxes, it's a famous. Maybe it's not maybe historically accurate, but the legend or the myth or the saying is accurate. He had the ocean, or not the ocean. He had the sea whipped. He ordered the sea to be whipped because he was pissed off that the sea destroyed the bridge that would enable his army to arrive faster, etc., etc. And that's the reason why this anecdote has been preserved throughout the centuries in the Western tradition, is simply because it illustrates the complete irrationality. Here, that's a little bit of a Greek supremacy. Already, those Westerners, they were already arrogant, supremacists, etc. But actually, it's partly true, but actually the Persians, back in the day, at least the aristocracy, they were Aryans, so they were Europeans in a sense. The classical Persian were an Indo-European people. And Xerxes bragged about his Aryan heritage, etc. Or if it's not Xerxes, the guy just before him, Cyrus or Darius, a few generation earlier or later. Darius, that's later, and Cyrus before, but whatever. Yeah, so that was an illustration in the mind of the Greek, the rationality, Western rationality, that those Orientals, in a way, were kind of irrational because they believed that you could punish the sea by having it whipped, whereas Greek rationality, actually that's how the myth was interpreted, but yeah, the anecdote was interpreted. What the Greeks, they knew already in the 5th century, they had already introduced a rational discourse, the logos, in place of mythos, in place of mythology. They had already introduced the philosophy of nature with the earlier pre-Socratics, as they are called, the earlier nature philosophers, Thales, Heraclitus, Anaximander, etc., and then Democritus, maybe. No, Democritus, that was slightly later, but Xenophanes, Zeno, Parmenides, etc. So the Greeks, they kind of knew that the sea had no intention. They did not believe in their mythology, Poseidon, etc. They had already moved beyond, in a way. So they knew that the sea had no intention of harming Xerxes and his army, and that trying to have the sea whipped, it would be kind of pointless. Yeah, so that's an illustration. This anecdote is kind of famous. Yeah. So why am I talking about this? Because the Spinozian perspective, and here, Mr. I will go pick up the book. He kind of talks about this, not about this anecdote, but about Spinoza and the view of scientists, that Spinoza, basically the philosophy of Spinoza, I simplify, means to apply the same scientific view, but onto human behavior. Which is kind of, in a way, it's a kind of dehumanizing, partly because it means that humans, in this rigorous deterministic perspective, they are like rocks, or clouds, or waves, or animals in the biological sense, that they have no free will and they are just completely determined. So that's the dehumanizing aspect, because it means that from a Spinozian perspective, humans have no more free will than rocks, or than the rain when it rains, or the sun when it shines, or the wind when it blows. But the counterpart is that if humans, from this perspective, are completely determined, when you understand this, you are a little bit more detached, because you understand that they are not evil, precisely. They can hurt one another and they can hurt you physically, but if you understand that morally they are as determined as a falling rock, or a rolling stone, or the falling rain, or the blowing wind, or the shining sun, you will be less emotionally involved. Yeah. Just this view, which in the historical perspective is already 3 centuries old. 4 centuries old. The Spinozian view, which is just, I simplify, but yeah, Spinoza applied the principle of causality expressed by Galileo and Descartes and the scientific revolution. He just applied this rigorously to the totality of the substance. So from this perspective, when you understand that humans are completely determined, you feel less emotions, at least negative emotions, because yeah. Yeah. But to think rigorously like this, it's kind of impossible for in most circumstances, because there are so many I believe that it's kind of true that at least others, they are determined, which is the good news about the religious good news, that humans, they cannot be, they are kind of innocent in the sense that if there is no free will, there is no evil. It doesn't mean that there's not suffering, but there is no evil for those who are determined. So that actually, that's my view of salvation for others. That's what I've been trying to do, to prove that other humans are not free, which means to remove the guilt that they might have, because if they understand, but we were determined, it was not they who acted if they acted wrongly, or it works for righteously as well, but let us talk about just the wrong aspect, the morally wrong aspect. If there is no free agency for others, it means that they cannot be evil, so they are innocent, strictly speaking. That's why the philosophy of Spinoza is kind of the philosophical formulation of the teachings of Jesus, basically. Yeah. Yeah, but what I wanted to say is, it's very difficult to think like this, because there are so many determinism that it's kind of impossible to deduce. Precisely. An individual, you cannot predict or you cannot categorize an individual, except if you know the person a lot. But for groups, it works. Here I just take an example. The rise of the alternative right in the broadest sense. I'm not talking about the alt-right, but actually partly, but groups of right-wingers in the West, which are an alternative to the right-wing establishments. It's very easy to predict. I mean, it was easy to predict, and it still is easy to predict, because for sociobiological reasons, whites are being reduced in number. The youth, white young people below 35 years old, they are in difficult situation because there are very few economic opportunities, or standards of living are declining. There is more insecurity. Their civilization has not a lot of prospect of prospering in the long term, given current trends. So they experience frustration, which tends to plus the biological attachment to territory and the defense of the territory, which is a biological inclination that all humans have. And with the movement of mass migration, in fact, it's very easy to predict, just based on sociobiological findings and anthropology, and that there is a switch towards the right in the Western world. I mean, it's empirically noticeable, but actually it can be theoretically anticipated in a way. Yeah. Also, here, it's not very smart, but actually it is. Libertarianism. I know that libertarianism will rise kind of everywhere in the West because the freedoms are being eroded, and the regime which takes away more and more freedoms all over the Western world is kind of destroying civil society, the state precisely. Here that's a distinction which is very smart from classical American conservative, but in the serious sense, the conservative of the early 20th century, the libertarian conservative, one might say. They opposed, I think, someone like Albert J. Nock, Frank Chodorov, guys like these, the old American right, maybe. That's what it refers to. Murray Rothbard wrote a book about this. I haven't read the book, but I know that someone like Albert J. Nock, he's kind of a type of right-winger that has few equivalents in continental Europe. There are tendencies, but it's really someone who is really anti-state in a radical way. But radical doesn't mean extreme, but it means a conceptual radicality, I might say. And yeah, so he opposed, correctly in my view, the state versus civil society. The more the state grows, the more civil society is being eroded, which means that the institutions, the interactions, the common life, and they are antithetical. One can only grow by eroding, poisoning the other in a way. That's what Jeff Deist talks about in his new book. I will not promote the book because I haven't read it yet, but I already have recorded the video where I promote the book. Yeah, that's why on a personal level I've been working on a singular level over the past many months to participate in local communities, to adopt a civic behavior, to help churches, to distribute books, to give food stamps for organic food with books to people who are in financial difficulties, etc. That's revitalizing. I have begun step by step. I'm partly autistic, so for me it's very difficult to socialize, especially with people that I have no emotional attachment. It doesn't mean that I do not appreciate the people that I interact with, but simply these are not people that spontaneously would be my friends, namely relatively young white males between 25 and 35 with a common center of interest. I have no person that I interact with in this sense, but these are mostly older people or really poor people of really different cognitive and social class, etc. Yeah, but it participates in my view of what I call my own American Revolution, that in order for a society to be free, there has to be a constant effort on the part of the citizens to vitalize communities. Otherwise it is the state who takes the place of civic. Otherwise the state simply replaces civic life, community life, by bureaucracy, which is inefficient, destructive economically, parasitical, etc., etc. So yeah, civic society versus the state. That's an important distinction which is relevant, made by, I think, Albert J. Nock and the tradition of classical right-wing libertarian conservative Americans. The kind of intellectuals who opposed the New Deal, which here I have to praise. I had no intention of talking about it, but I have to praise these people, because when you have a little bit of culture, the New Deal, first, is presented in the high school curriculum in Western Europe, but probably in the US as well, as some sort of a moral, benevolence and economic salvation, etc. Whereas, because it sounds good, because there was really a serious economic crisis, and suddenly the state intervene and bring the money, and they bring back employment and prosperity, etc. First, empirically, it's not true. They teach that, the good teacher, they teach that it did not bring economic restoration during the 1930s in the US. It did not work economically. They say that, but there is a deeper criticism, namely it's a radical change in the American mindset, the idea that the state has the moral legitimacy of intervening in the economy, which in the US was not acceptable morally before Roosevelt. And the guys who saw this and who understood this already back in the day, these were precisely those people, the old right. And it was very difficult to have this position back then, because in the context of the Great Depression, the state who intervenes, who give money for unemployment, who starts infrastructure infrastructure investment to stimulate economic activity, who checks the economic and financial health of banks, etc., etc. It sounded like good because it was very active. Herbert Hoover was considered to be inactive, and Roosevelt arrived on the scene, and he took a lot of measures, and he changed things. So a politician who acts, usually it gives the impression that he's competent, but actually the very few people who are intellectually clear-minded, not only on the short-term problems, because Henry Hazlitt, a decade or two later, was clear-minded as well, but on the fundamental moral change that it brought about in a country for which, contrary to continental Europe, the state interventionism is kind of was a taboo, because this is precisely what the Americans wanted to escape from by leaving Europe. Too much power to the state, etc., etc. Yeah. Why was I saying this? I intended to talk about race. Oise! I'm like I'm turning into an American conservative. You start talking about race, and then he finds a way to say, no, let's talk about business, the state, the economy, race. It's controversial. Let's talk about business. I'm becoming an American conservative. No. That's a joke. That's a joke. No, but actually, I understand. Here, I will make an intelligent remark. Really intelligent. I have the full view, in broad outline, of the movement of spirit in the Western world, particularly in the US, because this is where most, if not almost all, good ideas come from. And I have traveled very fast between over the past 7 years, but I remember many years ago, I had probably already discovered American Renaissance, the alt-right, etc. briefly, because that was not, to be honest, that was not really interesting. The alt-right, it was not really interesting intellectually, so I did not spend a lot of time. But the kind of right-wing, modern right-wing circles, and of course, from this perspective that I had at some moment, the view of someone like Alex Jones, with the famous, when he says, I don't care if America is 80% brown, as long as the Hispanics respect the Constitution. From the perspective of the modern right wing, it sounds completely ludicrous, and it sounds almost like a joke or like a stupidity. But actually, many years later, with a lot more maturity and growth, I understand why he thinks like this, and I kind of agree with him. But here, that's a Hegelian, not a Hegelian synthesis, but I agree with Alex Jones when he said it, or and all those who agree with the American conservative, the serious ones who say basically what is important are the institutions of this country, not so they kind of try to leave aside the question of race, and they talk about the institutions and the Constitution and the fundamental rights. So I agree with them, but I have the view of the kind of the alt-right, and I am neither. I mean, I agree more with the conservative, but I have nonetheless the clear-mindedness of the alt-right, namely a country where 80% of the population would be Hispanic, and maintain the Constitution and the fundamental right. It's not logically impossible. There is no logical contradiction, because it's not impossible. Like it's perfectly possible for a Hispanic American to be a genuine conservative, in the sense of a genuine American in terms of ideology, property rights, the Constitution, free market, autonomy on a not on a federal, on a local level, the respect to respect the American value. It's possible precisely because the American creed is an ideology, not in a derogatory sense. It's an idea. So it's possible, and there are indeed many Hispanics, Afro-Americans, Asian American, Jews, and other ethnicities who are genuine Americans, authentic Americans. So it's possible, and therefore it's not logically impossible that the quantitative determination, the quantitative proportion of the ethnic composition of the population might be changed, and America still remain America. It's not logically impossible, but actually here empiricism brings a little bit of clear-mindedness. It's very, very, very unlikely, which means that in order to preserve the institution, the population which has founded and maintained this institution, white Americans, predominantly Anglo-Saxon Americans, has to preserve a significant proportion, because here that's common sense race realism anthropology. For one classical American of Hispanic or Afro-American or Jewish origin, maybe there are here I give a number randomly, I have no idea, but there are many more which are not in accordance with the American principles. Whereas for white, it's more balanced. There are more, among white Americans, there are more people who respect the American values. I'm not talking about the modern egalitarian excesses, but the classical American values of individualism and property rights, etc. So among the white population, the proportion of people who respect these values, let us say the institutions, the spirit of the institution, it's much more significant among the white population than among the Hispanic, Afro-American, etc. So here just empiricism, which is backed up by the modern findings of sociobiology, which explains why certain groups of population are more determined to have a certain set of values, are more prone to adopt certain ethical, legal, moral, economic views, etc. Here it complements the view of the classical conservatives in the good sense. Yeah. So I understand why. Here that's the Spinozian view. I understand why the various moments exist, and I understand why these people think the way they do. Yeah. That's the logical distinction between possibility and probability. Yeah. Okay, I said less than 45 minutes, so here for 10 minutes I will talk about what I intended to talk about when I started this video. if I could speak peacefully with any person who is rational and kind of slightly intelligent, I would have, maybe I would not, I've already said, maybe I would not be friend, because friendship is partly determined by common features, age, culture, origin, social background, etc., partly language, etc., which can be partly overcome. But you have usually your friends, if you have friends, they share, at least in terms of age and common topic of interest. Yeah. So, but I might not be friendly, but at least, I might not be friend, but might become friendly, or at least have a respectable, interesting discussions. And I would have no problem of race, or no problem, if I could peacefully talk. And I would, here, that's my classical liberal self, in a normal context, I would be a white leftist of the 18th century, which in the modern world would be a classical liberal. I would be genuine, and actually I am genuinely interested in the culture and history of all peoples on this planet, but I do not dedicate a lot of time to studying Chinese civilization, Eastern Asia, Japan, Korea, etc., the Australian Aborigines, the history of Africa, the history of the Middle East, the history of the natives of the American continent, the Inuits, etc., etc. I do not. Northern Africa and the Southeast Asia, etc. I haven't had the opportunity to study thoroughly, so my knowledge is very vague. But if I could peacefully gather knowledge, either through reading book or through interacting with people, I would find this genuinely interesting. But the problem is that from a Western perspective, we are not morally allowed to be interested in our civilization. We have been dumbed down, and history has been falsified, so we are ignorant of our own tradition. And here the universal, cannot be reached without the mediation of the particular, namely a person who despises his own historical, cultural, anthropological legacy, whether it's Western or European. But actually here they coincide in the sense that the European tradition has become Western by expansion outside of the European continent. That's what it means. Western means the past 500 years with the colonies, America, Canada, Australia, etc., etc., and the ideology of science, capitalism, individualism, property rights, free speech, etc., etc., separation of religion and government, etc., etc. That's what it broadly means here. So we are not even morally, we still are, but it's very difficult to appreciate our own legacy, our own heritage as Westerners. So there are leftists who despise everything European or Western, but love Japan, the natives of Africa, America, etc. But they are kind of a little bit schizophrenic. But in order to love, and here there are, I know, maybe here it's typical of continental Europe, where there are still some remnants of an aristocratic mindset, at least in terms of culture, in very tiny circles of right-wingers, really high social status right-wingers who are really genuine intellectuals, and they are spontaneously classical liberals in a way. What are they interested in is culture, ideas, etc. And economics, that's for the masses. It's a little bit boring because, So they genuinely appreciate and love other cultures, but here from a really aristocratic standpoint. So they admire the greatness of the achievements of other civilization, but they kind of turn towards the right because they see that in order to love the other, first you have to have a stable founding block, one might say, and that Western civilization or the European civilization is being here, European civilization, if we want to be really rigorous, it does not exist as such. Western civilization does, but European, no, because precisely there's so much diversity. I'm not talking about modern immigrants, I'm talking about classical European diversity of culture, ethnicity among a homogeneous group, namely the diversity within white people, the ethnic and genetic diversity within an ethnically and genetically homogeneous, namely Europe, when it was completely white or almost completely white, was already diverse because there was diversity within the various white European groups. The Celts, here, because it's really mixed up, the categories of culture, language, ethnicity, they are kind of mixed. So, but the Germanic, Balt, Slav, Celtic, these are the traditional ethno-linguistic distinctions in over the past millennia, I might say, and centuries. So they genuinely love other cultures for their high achievements, and in this sense, I'm partly like them. But the problem is that they see that their own civilization is being threatened, so it's not that they reject others, but they focus more on trying to preserve their own civilization. And and here that's what I think. That's what I wanted to say when I started this video. That's what I had in mind. That's what I had in mind. If I had the time and the opportunity to peacefully get interested in other civilization, I would genuinely be interested in all other peoples and civilization. Not everything that they produce, but of course in the best aspects, like someone who is not white, when he looks at someone with a culture and intelligence who is not white, when he looks at European history in the broadest sense, white history, of course he doesn't have to be interested in all the aspects. He usually is interested, if he's genuine, in the best aspect: artistic, political achievements, intellectual achievements, etc., etc. But here I speak as the few white people who still have a culture. We are forced. Here I speak as an aristocrat. I'm not an aristocrat economically, but an intellectual, one might say. We are forced to get involved in politics, which is the realm of stupidity in a way. Not always, but and that's frustrating, because there are much more interesting things in life than having to talk about economics and stuff like that. So here that's the left, with their insane diversity program. They kind of harm diversity because they want to first the non-whites who live in Western Europe and the US, those who have been imported over the past few decades. They are not really diverse except in terms of genes, because they are being standardized in terms of behavior because of the bureaucracy, the welfare state, the educational system, which standardize everyone. So there is genetic diversity, of course, but there is no cultural, intellectual diversity because of the rigid political correctness. So first, it's not really diversity, only genetic, but not cultural, intellectual, etc. And then, because forced integration of highly heterogeneous population in a destructionist economic system of socializing bureaucracy, it brings about problems which prevents the intelligent people who care about their own people and their own culture and their own civilization. It prevents them from getting genuinely interested in other civilization, cultures, and people. So I will conclude with a remark. Instead of studying Japanese literature or the architectural achievements of Southeast Asia or the anthropological ethnocultural customs of the natives of South America, intelligent white people, they are forced to try to reason with white leftists about economics, and that's exhausting, and that's yeah. So here I just conclude what I wanted to say. Okay, it's slightly more, but America found the solution to ethnic diversity within humankind, namely racism or the negative biological tendencies of hostility towards groups. They can only be solved by individualism, namely to judge people from other groups not as members of the groups but as individuals. And here I agree with the Martin Luther King leftist view, which is, it's correct, but the problem is that the leftists, they are correct morally that you have to judge others as individual and not as member of a group. But the problem is that in order for the other to emerge as individuals, the socio-economic conditions which favor individualism, namely capitalism, private property, and minimum state intervention, if not state abolition, they have to be implemented. You cannot have individualism in the most noble, non-racist sense, like Martin Luther King dreamed of, one might say, if you have economic collectivism. So here, that's the reason why the libertarian conservative Americans, they are correct in their view, because in order to solve the problem of ethnic tension and hostility anywhere, actually, and for all times, one might say, the solution is individualism, namely to judge others not on their genetic identity, but on their values and their behavior. But in order for this to be made actual, there has to be private property rights and the American ideal of individualism, competence, skills, self-reliance, responsibility, and voluntary association. Yeah. And here I feel kind of good, because it's really challenging intellectually to find the correct solution, but I know that it is the correct one. Here I sound like a leftist. I know that I'm right. I know that it's the truth, the moral, political truth. Namely, in order to have a peaceful society where there is ethnic diversity, or actually for any peaceful society, there has to be individualism. That's my belief. Because groupthink and collectivism, whether it's heterogeneous, socialist, bureaucratic collectivism, as we have in the modern West, anarcho-tyranny in a way, or even a national collectivism, nationalist collectivism, it brings about groupthink, which brings about stupidity, collective stupidity. And here, there have been examples of highly homogeneous societies which have been kind of successful, but it is true here, the left is kind of right, that it often goes with militarism in a way. And in the modern day and age, it's not very adapted, one might say. So American individualism, which requires and presupposes property rights and the capitalist in the sense in individual endeavors and meritocracy, the Jeffersonian ideal is the answer, the political, ethical answer to the problems. And I know that this is the truth. Because here, I will conclude, that's what I meant, but because in order to transcend racism, people have to be treated as individuals. They have to be praised or trash talked as individuals and not as members of groups. But the problem the problem is that this view appeals predominantly to white people, not only, but predominantly. That's why the libertarians, they are morally right. But here it's kind of a suffering because I understand why white people act the way they do, and especially the Americans with their moralistic views, namely that when you know here. When you know that you are correct morally, you want to impose your truth onto others, which by very definition is not good because it's authoritarian and it's kind of dangerous. Here that's what the good can be dangerous, because if you try to force your views onto others because you are morally certain that you are good, it sounds good, but actually no, because precisely the modern left is the result of this belief, and the modern left has kind of degenerated intellectually. White leftists, I mean. Not all of them, but the ideology. But I understand why, when you have good intentions and that you have a sense of self-righteousness, I know that it's kind of not that good. I've received the Nietzschean vaccine, but nonetheless I understand that the Jeffersonian ideal is morally good. Then the trap to avoid is to try to avoid moral superiority, because this is precisely what can bring about excesses. But nonetheless, I know that this is correct. That this is my view of race. There are distinctions in ability, in achievements historically, in all sorts of characteristics, biological, behavioral, etc. But nonetheless, individuals can emerge from any group, and individuals have to be treated as such. That's my Christian view in the most noble sense. Christianity as the religion of personality, in a sense that a personal valuation of humans by God. Here that it's borrowed from Hegel, but actually he's right, that the opposition of Christianity to all forms of slavery and oppression of man, but then the excess is the leftist tendency of the degeneration of this Christian ideal is Marxism. The idea that all men have to be economically equalized, etc. But actually the principle, but then the critics, they would say that the consequences they derive from the principle. But I kind of disagree, because here the view really of humans as individuals is good and true. But it's not very appealing to a lot of people who prefer a group mentality, whether the group is the bureaucracy, the social class, or the tribe. I understand why, but here I'm a little bit, how should I explain this? I understand why a lot of white leftists, intelligent white leftists, why they think the way they do, and I kind of agree with them, but the problem is that they are idealistic, which is kind of good, but they the reason why the left has been so successful for many centuries now and decades, there is a reason. I kind of agree with some of the principles of the left. Of course, liberty, that's how the left began. Liberty, equality in rights, but then they want economic equality. So here is already the beginning of the degeneracy. But I kind of agree with the noble ideals of the left. But the problem is that there are a lot of people, a lot of intelligent people who use the noble ideals of the left to deceive the masses and to But here, if I had to be honest, because I sound like a good leftist person, I will bring a little bit of right-wing comments. And if I could speak to an intelligent non-white, I would say probably if he's intelligent, he's aware that a lot of people among his own ethnic group are not very intelligent, and he could say the same to me as a white person. He would say among white there are a lot of white people who are not very intelligent, so that the union of the intelligent versus the less intelligent. But it's kind of morally wrong, because you have to help those who are more deprived. So tribalism is regressive, but liberalism in the classical sense, namely an ideal of free agents who treat one another as individuals, detached from the group, it's noble, but it appeals to a quantitatively limited. Potentially it could appeal to anyone, but actually there is really the problem of the distribution of intelligence, and I try to find a compromise between the view of intelligent leftists who, of course, they appreciate diversity, because for them, diversity means people who are as intelligent as them from other ethnic background. A white leftist with an IQ of 120, most of the diversity that he encounters, if he does at all, these are highly intelligent Asians, Muslims, Hispanics, Africans, etc. So for him, that's not a problem. Like, it would not be a problem for me for the same reason. But he is geographically, sociologically, economically detached from the poorest in intelligence and economic status, poorest members of diversity, and the poorest member of his own ethnic group. Yeah, and so the white leftists, they want to secede from the less intelligent of their own ethnic group, but eventually from other as well. And the right winger, they want to secede from the ethnically different. So my view is that I laugh, but actually it's not a laughter out of it's kind of a. My view is that the role of intelligent people, that's what I've been trying to do and still try to do, is that to encourage dialogue with the intelligent member of ethnically diverse group, while helping the deprived of your own ethnic group. So tribal, in a way, tribal solidarity with the poorest members of your own ethnic group, poorest either in terms of intelligence or economic status, which are often correlated. So tribal solidarity, but with an openness towards the out-group, which is, it's morally good, because this is what someone like Ron Paul does. He does not help necessarily directly the white working class, but actually he does. So that's why Ron Paul is good. His ideology, his view is good, because that's a way of help, of fulfilling one's own moral duty towards the community, which is actually ethnic, to defend the interest of the least endowed member of your own ethnic group in terms of intelligence, competence, etc., while remaining open and appealing to all intelligent people. So that's the morally good position. And here, that's why someone like Thomas Sowell is very important, because that's the embodiment of an Afro-American scholar, a very competent scholar in the terms of economics, who defends the interest of all Americans, including the poor white, the white trash. But he does this intelligently, not compassionately, but through economic reasoning. So he defends the interest of America, and therefore of all Americans. Not equally, because precisely this is not egalitarian, but he defends the interest of all genuine Americans, and this is exactly what the libertarians do. They defend the interest of America, and which means a lot, I mean, all intelligent white libertarians, they defend, not directly but indirectly, the interests of the minorities, of poor blacks, poor Hispanics, etc. So Thomas Sowell does what a lot of white libertarians do, namely he defends the interest of poor whites, but not directly and not compassionately, but he does so indirectly by defending the interest, economic, cultural, etc., of America, and therefore of all American citizens, or at least the overwhelming majority. But because here, I will make another remark. I wanted to talk for 30 minutes, but if you care about the interest of the country that you identify with, whatever your ethnic background, it is in your interest, if you really care about the country and not about other affiliations. I'm not saying that you have to, but if you do, it is in the interest of everyone who advocates the interest of the country to have an immigration policy based on competence, IQ, and or skills, namely to let only highly competitive and in terms of economic competitiveness and highly skilled people, which is often very, very correlated with IQ, you ought to select the best. And a lot of diverse people in the West, a lot of them, they don't care about the country in which they live. They because here they don't care about improving the skills or the level of intelligence. That's the example of Seymour Itzkoff, a Jewish American who wrote a book about the decline of intelligence in America, where and that's the same in the bell curve with Herrnstein. It's partly Charles Murray, but also Richard Herrnstein. The decline of intelligence, the underclass, it's a phenomenon, it's a problem which affects all ethnic groups. Dysgenics, an intelligent society ought to be able to discuss dysgenics intelligently, because dysgenics, it affects white groups, black, Hispanic, Muslim, probably in the Western, in England, France, Germany, etc. It's in a civic interest of any person who cares about a society to not to implement legislation to control, but to try to reduce the downgrading of intelligence and to increase the level of intelligence independently of of race, that would be a progressive form of eugenics, but that would be really a civic nation. I'm not a civic nationalist, but actually I understand why as well. But it's difficult. I know that Jefferson is right. I know that this is right. I mean, not everything personal, because I haven't read his biography, but the ideal of Jefferson is morally good because it's universal, it's individualist, it respects the rights of the individual. That's really good in the classical Western in a way, but actually it's universal. But I have enough sociobiological knowledge to know that a lot of people simply on this planet, they do not have the IQ or the culture to be interested, or the opportunity to be interested in really intellectual, rational debate. So it's not their fault, but that's just how things are. Yeah. I know that my political views, that's my American Trinity, Ron Paul, Charles Murray, Thomas Sowell, this is the highest that that mankind has produced, this ideal. And it's not a random assertion, because the country which has adopted and preserved these values has become the greatest nation on earth in a couple of centuries. Of course, the Anglo-Saxons deserve a lot of credit. It's not just a piece of paper. But nonetheless, these values, Western individualism, to simplify, have had tremendous results. And here, I understand the criticism of the right. They accuse the decline of being a consequence of the principles, which here I partly agree, but the reason is, Western countries, especially America, but all Western countries, after having adopted these values, it's true for the English, the French, well, the Germans. The Germans, it took a little bit more time, but the English, the Americans, the Canadians, and the French, the German as well, but yeah, they were a little bit more rusty, so it took more time to, yeah. But these values, liberal value, classical liberal value, it has degenerated into modern liberalism, which is just insane. I don't know how to qualify this. The modern liberal insanity, the modern leftist nonsense, is a consequence of the success of the classical liberal ideology, because it was so successful that almost all problems had been solved in the 1950s for Westerners. Economic problems, problems of opportunity. They had, Western societies had solved so many problems that so many human societies had been confronted with for millennia, that they were too successful, and they started to invent new problems, importing poor people, migrants, diversity, trying to fight oppression in the most statistically limited forms of sexual behavior, etc., etc. So the reason why liberalism has degenerated, one of the reasons, is that it was so successful economically. That's why the leftists, they invent new problems constantly. That's the right-wingers, their job consists in solving problems. They are very efficient when they are not bridled by the left, but the left, they create problem, the right winger, he solves the problem, and then the left creates another problem, the right winger, he goes back to work. I laugh, but it's partly true. It's partly true. So the West sets itself problems that it's trying to solve. That's really the sad aspect, is that it was too successful in comparison with all past societies and all other societies in the world in the 1950s and 60s. Yeah. Well, I'm a little bit. It's not pissed off because I'm not angry, but it's not depressed either, but a little bit. Maybe melancholic. That's not melancholia, but I don't know how to express this. But I watch, not every day, but almost every day, videos by Ron Paul, Stephen Molyneux, Tom Woods, etc., etc. And it's saddening in a way because I know that they are correct morally, politically. That's really good. The ideas that they expound, they are really good, but it appeals to so few people, and the people who are attracted by these ideas, at some moment they become a little bit disenfranchised, morally disenfranchised. I don't know what you say, but they become they become discouraged in a way, and I kind of understand why, because it's very difficult to because there are simply a lot of people who are not interested. They are not interested in ideas. They are not interested in reading books. They are not interested in the theoretical aspect of not just the economy, but of the theoretical aspect of life. They are not interested in ideas, one might say. My attempt is to try to get people interested, precisely, and I will keep trying. Maybe with clumsy attempts, but that's my belief in a way that most people, if given the opportunity, the economic opportunity here, that's partly Marxist, but actually they would be interested in knowledge. So in a sense, I'm an idealist, not I mean also, but I can maybe a naive idealist. I will keep. Right now, I will rest, but I will keep. I will keep working. My views, they are kind of stable. When I'm in a stable mood, Charles Murray, on the topic of race, namely the ideal of a society where it's not only possible but it's encouraged to discuss intelligently about the newest findings of science with potentially everyone interested. But precisely the idea is to promote a society where people would be interested. They wouldn't be forced, but they would be encouraged to get interested in the because here I will end on a note of a idealistic rhetoric, but actually the knowledge which is made available on the internet, but on books, it's worldwide. The book by Charles Murray, Human Diversity, I can deduce that it predominantly appeals to middle class whites predominantly, but actually it's universal that it talks about gender, race, and class, and it talks about anthropological determinations which are universal. This book ought to be read in every literate circle on this planet. I will go clean my room and keep working on the